Hello everyone, I am Pankaj Dutt and I welcome you all to today's first episode of Mint CXO Dialogues, co-powered by Alexander Hughes. I'm sure a lot of you could be fatigued by the webinars we've seen in the lockdown, but this is an initiative we have put together to bring some of the very compelling and critical issues to all of you, and we'll try our level best in each episode to assemble a panel of very interesting and accomplished leaders to enrich you with this discussion. I also take this opportunity to thank HT Media Group for giving us all possible support to make this event possible and extend our outreach to a wider audience. Today, we will be discussing a very key issue which almost all businesses would grapple sooner or later, which is the absence or breakage in the data collection, which is required to make very crucial business decisions. And we have a very interesting panel, and we couldn't have found a better moderator than Amit Sinha, who's going to be conducting the session today. Amit is a partner with leading management consulting firm Bain and Company, has been with them for over 18 years, having a client ranging from public sector to private sector companies, leading technology companies and MNCs. And he has been advising them on range of issues from growth strategy to performance improvement to implementing their strategy, and also some of the leading technology companies on using or leveraging data science, AI, and machine learning. Amit leads the advanced manufacturing and services practices for Bain in India, and he also has a additional responsibility of leading the utilities and renewable sector practice for Bain in the Asia Pacific region. Holding a dual MBA from Wharton and an electrical engineer by qualification. I will now hand it over to Amit. I don't want to hold you any longer from this interesting discussion. So, Amit, over to you, and all the best for a very wonderful discussion.
Great. Thank you. Pankaj. Thank you for the opportunity. Very excited to be, hosting and moderating this session. Let me start with introducing the fabulous panel that we have today. We have four gentlemen who are going to be sharing their experience with us. Let me start with Rajiv. Rajiv is an alumnus of Harvard Business School with 20 years of P&L, commercial operations, brand and product management experience. He's currently the CEO of Reliance Entertainment's Big Energy, one of India's most respected content development and production companies. Prior to Reliance, he was the CMO of Intex Technologies, a billion-dollar US homegrown Indian disruptor in smartphone and consumer durables. And prior to that, he led the turnaround at Discovery Networks India and South Asia business. So welcome to Rajiv, first of all. Um, Next, we also have the pleasure of Dr. Shantanu Bhattacharya. He is a data science leader with expertise in machine learning, AI, and digital products. He is currently the chief data scientist at Airtel. In the past, he has led Facebook's emerging market product with over 350 million users. He's worked at AOL, Global Data Analytics, and successfully created and exited two startups. Shantanu has experience with building world-class teams, scientists, and technologies to create cutting-edge technologies, driving significant business value. He holds a PhD from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. He's an alumnus of MIT and IIT Bombay. Welcome to Dr. Shantanu Bhattacharya as well. Next on our panel is Rajan Amba. He's an accomplished lifestyle retail professional with a long track record with leading retail brands Nike, Carrot Lane, and Tanish. Held various leadership roles within retail industry, ranging from brand communication, product creation, sales, and managing retail operations. He is currently working as AVP Fashion, where most recently he took the responsibility of COO with Carrot Lane and earlier led sales and retail operations for Titan's Jewelry and or Tanish that many of you may be familiar with. Finally, we have Preet, a analyst, analytics expert, thought leader, and a passionate evangelist of data science, with distinguished career spanning more than 2 decades. Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Aditya Birla Group. Deep is leading the charge of um, AI-led digital transformation to enable operational efficiencies, drive new business growth, and deliver successful outcomes into their portfolio. Prior to ABG, DB was the founder of CEO of Tata Insight Bonds, Tata Group's big decision science company. He has various key positions in US and India with multi-actions like BCE, Amex, and to see the global digital analytics. And he's a computer science graduate, MS in information systems and MBA in marketing from Arizona State, and holds several patents in data science information management space. So welcome to all the four panelists. You can see them. There's a little bit of background noise, so if people can go on mute when they are not speaking, that would be very helpful. So welcome, Rajiv, Shantanu, and Rajan. Great to have you. Yeah, the noise is gone away. Thank you. Let me just start with certain questions. But before I ask questions, let me give a little bit of context where we are. Rajan, there's a little bit of noise from your phone. Maybe you can go on mute. No, try that. No. Yeah, it's gone away. I think there's a little bit of white noise there. Um, you know, the world economy, roughly 86 trillion, was expected to grow at 3 to 4%. So it was going to cross 90, 91, 92 trillion. Because of COVID, it's going to shrink by roughly 3 trillion. So it's going to shrink by 3 to 4%. And as of now, the latest projections are there from IMF. The global financial crisis, as a comparison, shrunk by only 0.1% from 2008 to 2009. GFC caused the shrinkage in world GDP by just 0.1%. The great lockdown recession has already caused the demand, the economy to contract by 3%, by three odd trillion dollars. What we are going to see is going to be a huge difference in the demand side of the equation. The demand is going to contract. The story is going to be very, very different across categories. The GFC took roughly 12 months to recover. We don't know when the great lockdown crisis, how long will it take? It's 30 times bigger, if you just look at the math, but hopefully the demand part will come down significantly faster. The question that we have is, how is that data going to help us decide and help take decisions where the demand comes back faster than the other locations, segments, categories, and which customers? So with that, let me just ask a couple of questions let me start with Rajiv and Rajan. We talk about something called fast out. Fast out meaning, this is a recession, but as the demand comes back, the companies that are nimble, the companies that are fast in terms of channeling their energy in the right direction will benefit from that growth. The lockdown is being eased out in pockets and the demand is slowly coming back in the system. How are you and your organization prioritizing the efforts using past data, but also the recent data to get most impact from your sales efforts, marketing, and promotions that you still are putting into the ground? So let me request Rajiv to start, and then maybe Rajan, you can take that same question after Rajiv finishes.
Thank you, Amit. So, I must start with the word which has been used, perhaps overused in the last 3 months, called unprecedented. Now, by unprecedented, obviously, it means that what we're seeing today has not been seen before, and I hope it's never seen again. Therefore, the use or utility of data in current crisis is a good discussion to have. But let me come back to what typically companies I know are doing, but I would speak more from a media point of view because I'm an expert in media. I spent most of my career in media, so I must kind of retain to media lens. It's got 3 sides to this crisis if I talk about media. One is the demand side, and I don't think there can be a better time, and I don't know how this is going to sound, for media from a consumption point of view. Never before media has been consumed so much, whether it's on linear television or it's on digital. So that's the demand side. From a consumer point of view, we haven't seen any reduction. In fact, we've seen phenomenal growth. If you see markets like even developed economies like, let's say, America, Germany, England, the time spent on traditional linear television has jumped from 5 to 15%. Now, this is, of course, in a territory where we were thinking that there is a demise of linear television. There is immense cord cutting happening, and obviously, therefore, the television will have a limited future. But has this crisis given it a new lease of hope? We do not know yet. Uh, Second, let's talk about digital. On the digital side, the consumption has dramatically gone up. And if I see some Netflix number over the last quarter, they added about 18 to 19 million subscribers over this period. Now, obviously, they are calling it an ad hoc growth, but we know that perhaps half or a quarter of that number may just stay on. So on the demand side, from a media point of view, it seems like there is no crisis. But on the supply side, where I operate, which is the B2B market, I personally believe on the supply side, which is the program content, new movies, new shows, there is a tremendous amount of crisis because we cannot shoot on grounds. The last 4 months, the world has not been shooting anything of any merit, barring some animation or animatics which can happen in closed door studios. So on the supply side, there's a dramatic problem. Now, of course, we're getting new kind of SOPs every day, as perhaps the production will start in a week or so in various parts of the country. How and in what shape and what scale will it happen is again a large question. So on a supply side, we have a tremendous problem. On a demand side, we do not see a problem. But the third side, which is the most important side, which is the business side. Most of the clients in India, especially, and in my clients as well, we are largely an advertising-driven economy. Now, advertising-driven economy depends on brands' money. Now, if the brands like auto, banking, financial sector, or even insurance companies or e-commerce are not doing well, they're not going to put their money. And about 80 to 90% of the digital economy basically runs on ad money. Television is still maybe 50-50. So if the ad money is not coming in, which means that most of the companies, especially in media, while they may have great demand opportunity, but in terms of their balance sheet, they have a tremendous problem sitting there. So there are three sides to this, and this crisis is gonna, shape our decision making, our business models, our agility very differently. So I want to open with this, and then of course we'll come into more details as we go along.
You're great, great. You're right. My watching animation percentage has definitely gone up with my kids. So absolutely right. Very good. Rajan, your thoughts, from the consumer side, and especially you cover a lot of background on the lifestyle side. So your thoughts.
Well, I think I'll carry on from where Rajiv kind of started. There's been a tremendous consumption of digital and media, which means that even in these times, we now know a lot more about our consumers, because if earlier there were 100 consumers searching for our brands, we now have maybe 300, 400 consumers. And as you know, digital data means that we have a lot more structured data. So we have a lot more data about our consumers, some of them who were there in the past and some of them are new. Obviously, this is good stuff for next steps, right? But I think your question particularly pertains to how do we as businesses and retailers in particular assess which are the markets to invest in. And I think that it's about reestablishing the baselines. We know that from digital data and from our walk-in data, we know that there were certain expectations or certain numbers in the pre-COVID area that we could expect on a day-to-day basis. From digital data, we know that even during the lockdown, there has been a certain level of interest in the brand, and I think it's fair to assume that anybody who would be excessively interested in the brand and has been repeatedly coming to your site, we would like to address those consumers immediately after the lifting of the lockdown, in the belief that that's a consumer who's really interested and has some intention. So I think most of the brands would have that assessment as to know who are the consumers who have been repeatedly coming and accessing our brands digitally, and therefore they would be the first people that we would address either by phone calling or by personally, through emailers or whatever the case may be. So I think the biggest aspect is looking at the green shoots. I think digital data will allow you to assess how markets were before the lockdown, how markets are moving in the lockdown, and therefore which markets are still showing a strong tendency for your brands or for your consumption of your products. But more importantly, I think in the current context, it's time to go back to basics. We in retail particularly have a lot of manpower in our stores. We have a lot of people in the field. I think it's time for us to go back to our consumers on phones and ask them and invite them back into the stores. But more importantly, whenever we connect with the consumers, whether in the store or on phone, I think it's time for us to ask them a lot more questions about what's happening in their lives and to assess what is the sentiment and the mood for our respective brands. So it's back to basics, I believe. There's a lot more opportunity to interact directly with our consumers and assess what's going on in their mind. There's no better way, I believe, at this point in time.
Very helpful. Thank you, Rajan. Thank you. Let me pick up the last bit that you said, Rajan. You are getting a lot of digital customers, uh, but we see that the world is digital plus physical. You need to balance your source footprint there. So as we think about it, maybe this question to deep with Rajan. Rajan, maybe you start with your thoughts as you continued. How reliable? What's the your data that you get in the last month, and what do you do with this data? Because you get more digital data, less physical data, and can you take decisions based on this? Maybe Rajan, you go ahead and maybe think about that.
I think most of us are still assessing and assimilating the data. And I certainly believe that the behavior post COVID will be quite different from the behavior of customers pre-COVID. So I think it's very premature for us to take any calls on the behavior during the lockdown period. But I also believe that there is no such thing as wasted data. I think in the process, as I said earlier, we are learning a lot more about our consumers, and I think in due course of time, over a period of time, we will learn how to absorb this data, to analyze this data, and be able to effectively use it even for the future. But I also believe it's a time where, for example, in retail, we can marry our walk-in data, which is the physical collection of data, with the kind of searches happening in particular pin codes or particular regions to assess and make sure that there is a correlation between actual consumer behavior on ground and their actual behavior on their digital searches. So I think there is a there is no such thing as, I mean, the data is not going to go to waste, right? But there's a lot more work to be done on that data.
Deep thought.
No, thanks. I agree with Rajan, and thanks, Amit, for the question. You know, what happens to the reliability and the quality of data? I would agree with what Samir just said. One needs to understand that organizations have already had a lot of access to various kinds of data. While I do understand that what has happened today makes some organization paupers and some organization kings. Organizations that were digital in nature will now have data in abundance. They'll now have globs and globs of information. Whether they are in e-commerce, whether they are in digital payments, whether they are in media, and what have you. But there are organizations that perhaps used to extensively use points of sale data, survey data, and a lot of offline mechanisms, which then used to get extrapolated to predict demand, will become paupers because that data is becoming more and more sparse. So this whole lack of offline data would trigger a need for partnering either with external data providers, with public sources, and even perhaps fostering non-competitive data exchanges. But that said, I don't think the world should worry too much, because while the offline data is becoming sparse, there is a slew of unprecedented demand for data that has never been analyzed. For example, health and hygiene is number one criteria and number one pain point for everybody. And now we have the information available through IoT devices, whether it is wearable data. There are new forms of data like social distancing data, which will be important. There'll be information pertaining to temperature reading for pandemic analytics, migrant data, risk containment data for better logistics planning, and so on and so forth. So there is a need for new amounts of data. And the other thing which Samir touched upon is the conventional data, which is getting sparse, is also getting augmented with this whole world of unstructured data, whether it is data coming from IoT devices. Over 20 billion devices are now connected. Image, voice, text, video. Samir talked about store. Now store data in conjunction with digital data. Tomorrow, CCTV camera data could also be used to understand expressions of consumers as they're walking into the store. So for each of these, I do believe that as organizations are starting to look at what data they have and what data they need to build upon, they've got to have an understanding of what business objectives they're looking at seeking, and then explore conventional and unconventional ways of modeling and estimating outcomes. To give you an example, they talk about data science being science. I believe it's science plus art. One powerful information source of information is power, the power data. It's a great proxy for consumption because power tells me who's at home, what is the consumption of power. The consumption of power tells me the type of appliances you have. It can also give me a relative understanding of the number of people at home. So if I use that information and let's say couple it with broadband data, the combination of this can help me predict demand, consumption patterns, and a lot of other things. So the objective is to now become more creative, look at a combination of what I have, what's not there, which can be captured through unstructured data mechanisms, and what can further be augmented through new smart ways of combining through what I call it a surrogated data to get the same kind of results. Back to you.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. Hope you can hear me better. I know there was some, is this better? Hopefully. Yeah. So, that, thank you so much, Deep. I think very interesting to hear your perspective. Let me turn the problem a little bit different now. We've heard a lot about data being captured, but all the data is captured by at different places, different location by different companies. And as you heard a lot about the migrant population, moving from one location to the other, so demand is also in a way likely to shift. Are there opportunities for data sharing, data collaboration that could get, become more and more relevant going forward? In the industry, and some industry will have more privileged information, some will have less privilege, so there will be confidentiality and security issues also. Let me turn over to Shantanu, and why don't Shantanu you take on this question, and then Deep, I'll come back to you. Both of you will have great perspective from the data side, both sharing as well as security.
All right, thank you, Amit. So the data sharing, the first piece of digital data that retail ever got was, just making sure my mic is on, was the 1974, right? In a Wrigley's store in Ohio, someone scanned a bar of Wrigley's fruit juice, and that became the first piece of real digital retail data in the world. Since then, in the 70s, we have talked about sharing the data in multiple forums, partnerships, and so on. And the issue has been, there have been two issues really. One, everyone who participates in such a forum has to understand that there is a benefit of sharing the data, right? There's a common benefit, there's a common pool of data, everyone sort of aggregates it and everyone benefits. And this has become critical in a post-COVID scenario where most of the industries don't have all the data, but have some of the data. The second thing is that in order to make it successful, what really needs to happen is that sharing needs to happen in a manner so that one's competitive advantage is not eroded away or the consumer privacy is not broken. If either of that happens, people will either stop sharing or consumers will not participate in the data gathering exercises that are sort of going on, right? So how do you sort of do that? I mean, the data, if we start thinking about the data, so far we used to think about the data that exists within our company. We should start thinking about much more broadly about data that not only exists in our company, but also exists with third parties in the industry and across the industry. So let's take your example, Amit, the migrants. So one of the things, for example, we would like to know, the migrants drove a lot of the demands, right? So for example, a lot of the industry I'm in, telco, a lot of the demand for data came from the people in the gig economy, right? The cab drivers consumed a lot of data during the daytime. The migrants who worked in the banks or the supermarkets or at the ATM went back to their house at night and watched, say Bengali movies on YouTube, right? A lot of the high data consuming population were the migrants. So now that they have gone back to their native villages, a lot of them, how do you sort of get the data of when they're coming back, right? Because that will give you a baseline of pre-COVID, during lockdown, and post-lockdown scenario, the baselines. So a lot of them, for example, who already have apps installed, cab drivers, delivery boys, haven't deleted their apps. They're carrying that with them. You already have permission from them to look at their locations. This is when they signed up for it. So take a look at data on an aggregated basis. So it will tell you that, I'm just making it up. 2% of people from Bangalore who are migrants went back not only to Bengal, but in a district in Purulia, in certain villages, right? And now 0.5% of them are starting to come back. So that's a very valuable data. It tells you the shift line, the shift of the baseline, right? The second piece of data we need to start looking at is really the things that we haven't considered in normal times. So what happened? COVID was a game changer in terms of habits. Our digital payments went through the roof, right? So for example, in our industry, right, we were probably, and I cannot give the exact number, but we are in our 20s and 30s in terms of digital payments. A lot of people, most of the people actually went to the store, the mobile store, to recharge their phone, right? It's as close to 100 as it can get now because the stores are not open anymore, right? So when that shift in the habit is happening, you have the data from payment providers like Google Pay. Google Pay, when you open it up, it captures the location. If you start aggregating and anonymizing that data, the anonymization part is extremely important, and start providing as an industry sort of on an industry-wide basis, you'll start getting a view of how people are moving, where they're moving, when they're coming back, and also just the aggregate numbers. You don't have to tell you how much someone paid, but just saying that so many transactions are being done by people in a constant period, which is during the lockdown, will tell you how the economic activities are moving, right? The third one that I'll talk about is what I think Rajan talked about, right? Which is we got to be back into the basics, right? You really have to start thinking about this is once in a lifetime opportunity to build sort of a new industry, right? Our entire survey process, the consumer survey platforms, have largely been offline, right? Why don't you take a view today, saying that look, things that will be moved online in next 10 years. We have done things in 5 weeks that we wouldn't have done probably in 5 months or maybe even 5 years, right? That industry probably needs to look at the entire digital sort of accessibility of people, take those information and take those platforms online and start building a statistically reliable base of people on whom we can start getting the consumption data and so on. This is really a lifetime opportunity. That industry that needs to get disrupted will get back faster to normal if that did, right? The last but second point that I was talking about, which is you can do all of that. But if the privacy, consumer privacy is not maintained, two things will happen. One, or the individual data element privacy is not maintained, two things will happen. Either the companies will not share the data, or consumers will start shutting off their apps and the location and so on which you're starting to get that data. Now, I'll tell you, this is probably just a happenstance, but it's probably one of the most fortunate time in the history. In about 2017, technologies that were not available, things such as federated learning and homomorphic encryption, got invented both at MIT and at Google, which allows you to preserve privacy and also share the data. Had it not been there, I would say it would be a much harder job. So the technology is there. What you need is a shift of the mindset. Everyone sort of hoarded their data thinking this is my competitive advantage. The post-COVID world essentially proved that you are equally at disadvantage as everyone else is if you don't share it.
Great thoughts, Shantanu. Deep, do you want to share your thoughts?
I echo with the points that Shantanu made, and in fact, there's not a lot I could add, but I would say that look, we've seen data partnerships for decades, and then we'll see a lot more coalition of the willing. We'll see organizations come together where all of them think that they are net gainers as opposed to net contributors, and this is nothing new. In fact, one of the most sensitive information that we know is financial information, and we've seen this working beautifully and effectively and efficiently since decades amongst banks and bureau agencies, right? And we've also seen a number of loyalty companies create consortium of data that are shared amongst institutions that are part of the ecosystem to better understand consumer spend, passion, interest. So we will see emergence of similar models when it comes to sectors such as healthcare, education, auto, supply chain, and for that matter, even business collaboration that can enable enterprises to co-leverage the power of collective data going forward. We would see more data sharing between government and transporters because we do see immense strain on the system today when it comes to supply chain. We've already seen evidence of organizations with disparate consumer needs coming together. For example, Disney and Baidu. One is catering to children entertainment and the other is catering to children education, but they both are coming together. And with the advent of technologies, digitalization was anyway creating a lot of proliferation of data. Now with the challenging circumstances that we have, organizations will have to come together and share data. The good news is, and as Santu said, that we've got technologies today that can come to establish the two most important aspects when it comes to data: the trust that consumers need to have in an institution, and the choice and the control that they need to have. So with technologies such as blockchain, it is possible to share data responsibly amongst the trusted parties. And even if it is for aggregate data, there are opportunities to partner to create more holistic understanding. There are initiatives from open data government and so on and on. We do believe new business models that will come in, which will cater to information security, consumer trust, consumer choice, perhaps new business models when it comes to protecting consumer data, or even acquiring consent of consumers and allowing consumers to share the data with only those enterprises that they want to do business with. So this is almost a need of the hour, because organizations do realize that they do need data for making smarter decisions, and where they don't have data, they will have to partner with the others. Thanks. Back to you.
No, great point. Deep, I think I'm glad you touched upon blockchain towards the end. And I was wondering, when both of you are talking, that how do you balance the sharing of data with privacy, and blockchain, even tokenization, become critical enablers for that. And maybe just one more question, back to you, Deep, and maybe Shantanu, a minute of your response on that. Why is it not taking off in a country like India? Is it the regulatory part, or is it the discomfort from the consumer side, or discomfort from the institution side? What's your view?
I think there are a number of factors, Amit. I think first is just a lack of awareness. It continues to be an intriguing technology. Firstly, it was associated with cryptocurrency, so everybody who thinks about blockchain, they think about cryptocurrency. I think the onus is on us to help them understand that cryptocurrency was the first usage of blockchain, and blockchain today is being successfully used in healthcare and education. In fact, wherever you want to have digital identity and you want to safeguard the data, you can use blockchain. So
Correct.
clearly, the lack of awareness is one of the things that we as leaders have to demystify for the organization. The second is the lack of standard. Everybody is creating their own ecosystem of blockchain. We don't have one standard when it comes to blockchain technologies. So people are hesitant in spending large amounts of dollars in pegging to a particular blockchain standard, and then realize that this particular standard is not something that their ecosystem would want to participate in. So those two create a sense of reluctance. And the third is the consumers themselves have to come forward. India today is still talking about data privacy laws. I think the moment it becomes a living part of our life, where consumers start saying that, look, I want my data to be secured, I want to be in control, I want to have choice of data, and dictate the organizations to start practicing it, it will almost become a business imperative for the organizations to run with technologies such as blockchain. That will be an essential part. Just like how CCAR in financial services is an important activity, they've got to, regardless of how much does it cost, they've got to do CCAR. They've got to do enterprise risk management, because that's important. So is case with fraud. Similarly, I think blockchain and such technology will become important for them to do business. I think it's a combination of these things that I feel could probably create that inflection point.
Yeah. Shantanu, you can comment. And my other comment here was, with Arogya Setu app, we didn't do it for UID Aadhaar, but we had the opportunity to use blockchain to design the Arogya Setu. I know it would have taken longer time and whatnot, but Shantanu, you want to comment on your views on adoption of blockchain, and how your enterprise looks at it, and anything that you've seen which will affect the adoption.
So let's step back a little bit. Blockchain is one specific part of technology. One of the challenges in India that I see is that adoption of data itself is two things, right? The maturity of the industry to understand what the use cases are, right? No one can obviously point out a use case that someone used the data and got it, 5x, making it a 5x ROI on something, right? The second thing is also the maturity of how the data looks like today, right? My favorite term in terms of that is what I call is the India class data, right? The data in India is incomplete, incomprehensible, and incorrect, and very often free. The amount of time you spend just working on the data to get to usable format is probably the 10x. I'll just give an example. My house in California, 70909 Canyon Heights Drive, Fremont, California, 93739. The only option you have is between Fremont and California whether to put a comma or not. My house in Bangalore, 146 Purva Park Ridge, in 6 government document has 6 different addresses. It's villa, house, townhouse. The Purva is spelled multiple ways. Purva Park Ridge is one word or 2 words. No one knows whether the locality is Mahadevpura, Garuda Charpalia, or someone just made it up as Mahadevpura, Garuda Charpalia, which does not exist on the map. So just basic address disaggregation and identity disaggregation takes so much of computing at scale. Remember, we also live in a big country where there's so many people, right? Until you cross certain amount of maturity in terms of both the use cases as well as the sort of standardization of the data, the technologies will always move behind it, right? Technologies such as blockchain. So it's sort of where exactly that industry today is in terms of its maturity. And as time comes, as time passes, as people see an opportunity to build use cases, and COVID-19 is a great use case, right? A great time for that, right? There would be, my prediction is that there will be only two types of companies left. One who will figure out saying that, look, we need to retool our entire business model, not only business. The business model itself is under attack, right? So for example, I'm at Airtel, where I work, right? Does a retail store need to be redesigned? Our retail stores are just redesigned in terms of touch screen where you can do self-services. Well, touch screens are out. You cannot ask people to probably touch screen anymore. It's contactless world, right? It's how do you serve 300 people walking into a store in a day when you have to maintain a 6 feet distance and there can be only 2 people in a store? So you have to re-evaluate the entire business model, in terms of just going from end to end and figure out how do you serve, right? Do you make it more digital? If so, what does it mean in a country where half the people still have feature phone? So it's not only a question of whether blockchain or not blockchain. It means what does the world look like post COVID? And my gut feel is that a large number of companies, the leading companies, will essentially end up leapfrogging. The others will still be unable to figure out where they stand in this post-COVID world and sort of die out very, very quickly. And that fallout will happen in the next 2 to 3 years. It won't even take more than that.
No, very valid thoughts. Thank you. The quality of data, I think you raised a very interesting problem, because the quality of data helps define the insight that business leaders use for decision making, right? I'll come back to Rajiv and Rajan one more time. From a business perspective, I've heard so many comment that this COVID last 3 month data is unprecedented. One of you said that. So data, what you see here is not the normal data. We should just scrap it. We should just wait for the demand to come back, and just assume that COVID data is just should be ignored. But others say that, hey, no data is bad. It tells you a lot about the consumer behavior, how their purchase patterns will change, which categories are going to be more important. Let's say sanitizer category, is going to be a very big driver of future demand patterns. So Rajiv, from a media point of view, and Rajan after that from a consumer, point of view, retail point of view, love to get your views. Rajiv, why don't you start?
Let me give you two anecdotes on data per se in recession or in crisis. So I was reading a case yesterday on recession in 80s, 92,000 in US, and about 4,000 listed companies were surveyed. And to understand what really happened to these companies post the recession. Roughly around 20% companies vanished. 60 to 70% came to the same level of profit in 3 to 4 years. And 10% really flourished. Now, is that a right place, right time strategy for those companies, or did they do something dramatically? Or were they leveraging data? I'm not so sure. And I don't share the same enthusiasm on data like others, because I'm a slightly offline business, not an online business. Therefore, my access to data is not as much. Therefore, our enthusiasm on data is slightly limited. We leverage more on technology than data per se. The second anecdote is of a famous story of few people who had gone to an expedition around the Alps, and they got lost, and they tried various things to get back, and eventually they gave up. But one of them discovered a little map in their bag, and they started following the map, and they reached their coast. And on reaching, of course, the captain asked, how did you manage to come here? And they said, we had this map. And they said, but this map is not of the Alps. It's from another continent. So to say, they got what I call hope. So data sometimes gives you hope, encouragement, indication, trend. And I clearly think that is something that we are using, especially in media, this data, especially the COVID data, more of a reality check, more of an indication of how things have to change. It is more of a trigger for change than per se using data to develop products. So there are three things that we are typically in media will be doing, and I'm sure in many companies they will be doing that. So one is on the defensive side. So on the defensive side, obviously everybody will get into their cost management and cash flows. So that's the defensive strategy, and most of the company would have already got into that. The right side is the offensive strategy, and that is where the action is. The offensive strategy is how are you going to reimagine your product offering, how are you going to reimagine your company and processes, and how are you going to reimagine your customers and clients. And I think that's where most of the clients today are spending their time. The ones who will only focus on, let's say, the defensive strategy perhaps may do well in short term, but in over the long term of 3 to 5 years, I think the matching of offensive and defensive is something which is more at play. But again, not every company is going to be able to kind of navigate through this crisis using both the strategy. So I think the jury is still out, one, on how long this crisis is going to go. The jury is still out on what kind of data will come on this out of this crisis. And most important factor that I personally, I spent about 13 years in media before this, and I used data every day to program every hour according every classification possible on earth. But I can tell you it was still an extrapolation. Let me give you an example. You can tell me whether we should leverage this data or not. The number one channel in this country became Doordarshan suddenly for 2 weeks. Is that an indication of where a country is heading tomorrow? I'm not so sure. Half the country is watching mythology from prime time 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Half the country. Is that it? And that is also a repeat broadcast. Is that an indication of who we are and what we're going to watch tomorrow? I don't know. So many of my friends today, because of losing hope and perhaps even jobs, are cutting their digital connection. Now, this is completely reversed to cord cutting of cable TV. Is this a trend which is going to continue? So this scenario, which I call, data eventually comes from what I call the human factor. And right now, whatever data that we are collecting is based on one thing called fear. And I like data which is based on hope, then on fear. So everyone is consuming whatever they're consuming out of the either fear or insecurity or uncertainty. To me, to extrapolate this data in a period which will be of hope, I don't think the periods are equal. I'm not sure I can utilize this data. Of course, there'll be utility of the data in different forms, but I don't think I can extrapolate this data and actually set up my new business projections in a period of hope. To me, this is a data of fear, and that is the period of hope. And I don't think they come together. That's my view.
Mm-hmm. No, great to hear that. Rajan, do you agree or do you have a different perspective?
Agree with him. If you look at retail, for example, I think broadly 75 to 95% of our business across various brands is largely retail. And frankly, in the last 60 days, there's absolutely zero data, right? Because there's been no sales through the brick and mortar stores. Having said that, the past data then I would believe becomes very colored because we know that consumer behavior is going to change. So the price points that we are working with, I'm sure they're going to change. The categories that we are focusing on is not what the consumer is probably going to be focusing on tomorrow. They may not be wanting to buy expensive shirts when they can buy a relatively mid-price shirt which can do the same job, and so on and so forth. So the fact remains that the past data in correlation to future data with this COVID data in between, there is quite a gap between the two things. And I think that everything we have data of in the past will have to be looked at with a pinch of salt if we're going to use that from a predictive perspective. I think we can safely say that predictive modeling or using past data for forecasting is pretty much out of the window because uh, largely believe at this point that consumer behavior is going to dramatically change. Having said that, I think all of us in retail, particularly, will have to establish a new baseline in the near future, which means that we say that this period of the last 3 months we believe is a steady state period, which we believe can be considered as the new baseline. Compare that with the previous baselines at a micro territory level, at a market level, at a pin code level, and assess the movements and see which markets have moved better vis-a-vis their previous baselines. And use that data to focus on those markets because those markets seemingly, based on the movement of the baselines, have reacted better in the post-COVID scenario. So your marketing investments, your inventory investments, etc., could be based on the comparisons of the two baselines, the new baseline and the past. But by and large, I think that while there's a lot of data in the digital space, as I mentioned earlier, and we know a lot more about our consumers and our interests, for those of us in retail, yes, I think that the paradigm for data has to be reestablished going down the line.
No, great, great. Rajiv, you raised a very interesting point about Ramayana and Mahabharata. So let me just probe that a little bit deeper with you one more time, and with Shantanu, in terms of consumer behavior, right? The consumer behavior of last few months may not be the use the word fear. Let's say it's a new behavior, and it's driven by multiple situational parameters. So, Shantanu, from your world, you will use many of the data science model to say, hey, this is the behavior, this is what it means for future, these are the predictive models, and based on that, you should be doing this to capture demand, supply, etc. So, question to you, Shantanu, maybe, how would you use this data to predict consumer behavior? Because the behavior in the last 90 days is very different and will be very different for some more time. Will to Rajan's point, will more customers come on retail because they've started to do that, or will it's a transient phenomena that will go away? Love to get Shantanu your perspective first, and then Rajiv, I'll come back to you. Is that real, or is that going to go away?
So, Amit, as you are asking, past 2 months of data, past 3 months of data, my point to you was what data, Amit? Automobile sell, zero sales in 2 months running, right? So that's not exactly data. I could, Rajiv, you and I can all put together our prediction and just say next month is going to be very low, right? So in cases like that, so think about this. The other point that I was picking up is Rajiv's great point, which is 10% of the companies made great strides in the last recession. 60% sort of remained in the business, and the 30% went away, right? So I look at the data market as in the mindset of two types of people: the hedge fund managers and the people who run mutual funds, right? So the mutual fund guys are the one who are looking at trends, long-term trends and so on. The hedge fund guys typically look for signals, right? And I don't know who wins in the long term, but hedge fund guys, as I hear from my friends, make a lot more money than mutual fund managers, right? And it's probably have to do with the fact that they make more money in general for others, right? So what do you do? So you look for signals, right? In absence of any other data, you look for signals. What signals do you look for? So this is one of my lessons when I came back to India a few years back. I was going around the country looking for signals that I can use to build my data models, right? So those who are from Mumbai, know who are from Mumbai on the guest, drive from Mumbai to Pune. You cross an area called Palberu. If you look at the tall towers on the left, Godrej towers, probably 20, 30 floors, right? If you look at my type of data, you look at that and say, look, that's a big building, a lot of people. I open a supermarket, maybe Airtel, I can put a cell phone tower, and it will make money. Now I went back and looked at NASA's nighttime illumination data. That area is dark. So you suddenly know that the data you have had, which is big buildings, great potentials, right? Versus it's the nighttime illumination is dark, is telling you the true story, right? So you really look for signals that are unusual signals. So nighttime illumination is actually an unusual signal, right? The other unusual signal I'll tell you. People say that market knows it, right? So the fact that the Sensex has shifted 25%, all we are talking about is a 10% drop in the GDP. Is there a correlation? Is it 10%? Is it 30%? I would start looking at signals that are not even orthodox, because my orthodox signals are telling me zilch today, right? And if I want to build a model out of it, I can build a model. That's like fit it in my original model that I've been running. Look at the prediction; it will give me some number, so that number is believable or not. Who knows, right? It's at the end of the day, I'll actually spend the time not necessarily looking for what I don't have. I'll actually go look for things that I can have. And like a hedge fund manager, I can get an edge over others in the short term. So for example, this is also the time when the data scientists and the business people actually have to do what Rajan just said. You really have to go down to the basic. Go talk to your customers, right? I was talking to someone, and it apparently is a trend, given that you're wearing masks today. The ladies are no longer focused on the lipsticks. They are focusing on the eye care, right? Has any of your marketer gone and talked to the ladies, young ladies, and figured out what the market is looking at, right? Unless, if you're going to work like a data scientist and sit in your office and sort of build your models, go do it. Unless you sit down, tightly integrate with business, and go down and talk to the market, the people, and the others, right? Those who are running the business day to day. You're not going to come out of this recession well. That's one of my sort of hypothesis. The second one going forward is that, look, in my mind, it's very clear. The blanket approach you have taken of building data science model, running it regularly, giving out, acquisition, churn, lifetime value, all this is not forever, right? You really need to think about your entire business model differently. So think of it how the traditional industries have worked, right? They operate in a product out mindset. What I mean is that if you're a bank, you had a bunch of products, right? Mutual funds, loan products, interest products, savings products, and so on. You had an army of people who took all of these products and called me. I mean, that's the reason why I get so many calls and SMS asking me for 10 million, taking 10 lakh loans. Right? That model is so broken that unless you really take the advantage of COVID-19 and say, I'm going to reinvent that model, you could be one of the people who will go out of this business soon. So two things, look at short term. In 2 months, figure out how to survive, right? Run your models, run whatever data you have, go do that. But think of a 6 months, what new products are you going to bring out that will get you in the 10% category, which will survive. And that will force you to look at two things. One, unusual sources of data, and actually force you to go back to the basics, which is go to the market, talk to your consumers, figure out like a couple of hypotheses, you can put it up this way. Cars, that demand dropped. But in a post-COVID world where being contactless and not sharing mobility is a prime concern, would that drive up the demand for a second car in the house, cheaper second car, a second-hand car, right? Do you know consumers in your user base who have the cash and who are willing to spend, right? My hypothesis here is that only a very small percentage of ultra high net worth consumers are probably going to be willing to spend, right? And a lot of that spend could be substitution spend. So, for example, if you're not going to go out in a PVR gold class and watch a 500 rupees movie, are you going to buy expensive candies, expensive chocolates? All of these category by category, pin code by pin code, consumer section by consumer section, you really need to look at all of that. Plus, need to figure out what your new sources of data is, right? Which will give you the hedge fund advantage. Unless you do that work today and do the next, say, 6 months of work in the next 6 weeks, you will be in for serious trouble. Over to you.
Thank you. Raji, do you want to add anything? Because your business is a slightly different business, physical data, mix of physical and digital, right?
One of the most interesting data that will come to us will be from our clients. Largely, I would say it is my clients' response to this crisis will also shape our business. So one thing is for sure that we have realized that business and business models have to evolve and change to something else. But what that would be eventually has to come as an outcome of how my clients are shifting their models. Like I said, most of our clients are ad sales driven business models. So, but if the ad sales, and typically as a thumb rule, ad sales grows at twice the GDP growth. But if I go by the Crystal report, which is -5 this year and perhaps another -5 next year, then we do not know in a recessionary period how the ad sale market will grow or degrow. We don't have any estimation for that. But if the ad sale market is going to stay depressed, naturally the clients will shape and change their business model. And as we are suppliers of content, we'll have to change our business model as well. So our data point largely in this sense, in this industry, will be driven more by our clients, and who are therefore also a representation of the large economy, because most of the people who have brands advertise them. So we are perhaps going to be the last in the cycle of change, but clearly our indication will come from first the advertiser, then our clients, which is the platform, and then us. So this is where we're going to be. We're not going to be relying on a primary source of data. We're going to go by a secondary source of data, which is also coming through an indirect source. So slightly different to the model that Shantanu is talking.
Yeah.
Rajan, one more thing, Amit, just before you hang on. What Raju just said is extremely important. Who is going to figure out the leading indicator among the 10 competitors in the industry? If you have one extra data point, that's a leading indicator, and that you have figured out, you're going to come out of this recession much better than the others.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question, but before I go, maybe I'll take Rajan's input also on this question. Rajan, you use a little bit data, consumer behavior, leading signals slightly more than potentially Rajiv. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things. I think we would all realize in the 60 days we are all locked in our houses together with our families that have common sense, right? So, for example, I think one can safely assume that the sale of dishwashers will go through the roof once the markets open up. I think we can safely assume the need for good, solid audio technology like good speakers, good headphones, good laptops, because there's going to be a lot more webinars, there's going to be a lot more work from home. So all the conveniences that we require to make this an efficient operation, I think it's common sense for anybody operating in this space, and they should be ready for it when the markets open. That these categories will definitely go up. White goods, people will have realized after spending 60 days inside the house what are the upgradations they need and what are the missing elements that need to be filled up. So I think those things are common sense. They come with common sense and experience, and I think many brands in these spaces should be ready for it. At the same time, having seen how our lives have changed, I think brands themselves can decide which direction they want to take. So, for example, there could be a requirement for a brand to develop uh, uh, ergonomic furniture for use from a work from home perspective, which will make it relatively easier to sit for 8 hours on four different back-to-back calls, for example, or how to place your laptop in the most comfortable position so you don't hurt your neck or your back and so on and so forth. So I think there's still a lot of scope for us to use our own instincts, our own experience, and our own common sense. While we all, of course, always we look at data digitally, but I want to go back to my first point, which I made in the beginning, that for most of us in retail, it's time to go back to our field forces, our field partners, and use them to assess, engage what kind of mood the consumer is in, and to use Rajiv's phrase, uh, when are they going to move from fear to hope? And those indicators will help us to be on top of our game.
Yep, yeah. No, great point. If I can share a couple of things, as a consultant, I work across industries. We talked a lot about consumer behavior. What we're also finding is different employee behavior, and it's leading to, let's say, work from home. As you touched upon, I'm standing here doing the calls. I can't sit. It's just my chair is not as good. So can't do 8, 12, 10 hours of sitting and doing Zoom calls. So I'm standing, but there'll be need for ergonomic furniture that will go up. There will be going to be another example we're seeing in the market. This gig economy that is flourishing in other parts of the world, will become very relevant here, because many of the companies now thinking, hey, this work from home works, and there is very attractive talent pool, especially women who didn't have full day available. They have 4 hours, 6 hours available during the day, and they're extremely talented, extremely educated. They can only work from home if you can provide right laptop security, privacy. They are great talent for us to have. Do we need the real estate for our corporate offices? Can we do away with all this? I think many of these employee behavior, which also reflects in the consumer behavior, will also come into the play as we think about how this is going to shift. This COVID is going to shape our future behavior. Now, let me just turn to Deep. Deep. What's the next frontier for data science models? How can I think Shantanu, underscored the point made by Rajan about what's the leading indicators. But the challenge in this market is the quality of data, as we talked about. You can spend so much time trying to get the data, but one, it will be not conclusive and it will be dirty. And it'll take many months for you to actually clean that up, maybe make it relevant by the time behaviors have shifted. So, how do you think about this crisis as an opportunity to say, what, this is how data science models will evolve. This is how we're going to do demand simulation, going forward by location, micro markets, and so on and so forth. It's an extremely important question for the business leaders. I'd love to get your views and then maybe come back to Shantanu and others.
Certainly, Amit. First thing I would say that the current crisis itself has made it paramount that we capture data at a granular level this time, so that it can be used for future catastrophic event to simulate various scenarios. I do expect, organizations to now do better stress testing on disruptive scenarios, pandemic analytics, health, and what have you. So, if not anything, it will speed up and really accelerate the need for digitization across organizations, right? So, people will start questioning the CIOs, the CDAOs will start working very closely with the MDs to understand what are fundamental investments that are needed in terms of collecting, capturing, and storing the right pieces of information so that they are not caught unawares going forward. That said, I think firstly, I would say that not everything is lost. There's still a lot of information that is available today, while less in terms of forecasting and predicting consumer behaviors, but some which can be still used in the organizations today. For example, remapping a supply network can be done and should be done by organizations, right? Which is, how do I plan my inventory? How do I plan my logistics? I already have an information in terms of COVID hot zones. At least I can have a clear indication in terms of what should be my inventory and my distribution strategy in terms of locations that are operational or not. Organizations need to start thinking about concepts of, at least from a manufacturing standpoint, concepts of dark factory. Fully automated factories with minimal or no human for better preparedness of future. You don't have to have a large scale factory, but maybe have a small factory which simulates all aspects of the asset classes, the equipment that a factory would require, so that they start capturing information to understand how they can remotely run a factory if tomorrow a similar crisis were to happen. Arrive at an optimal mix of brick and mortar or digital channels. As I said earlier, you've got to start thinking about interesting data exchange models. If I was Swiggy, I would be sitting on a massive valuation of data, because I know from the Swiggy area who are the leaders and who are the followers, who are the adventurous people who are still wanting to order food from outside. And these are the ones, if I was a retailer, reach out to them and stimulate demand. Would you not want to check out the next set of apples that we have for you? That's the information that Swiggy has. If I was into digital content, again, there is information pertaining to the type of content that is being watched, which can then be used for me to personalize certain offers. So the objective is, as much as we force ourselves to only think about the data that we have, I think it'll be very difficult for us to come out of this. I think we have to start thinking about partnerships. We got to start thinking about what we can do in terms of aggregate level. While organizations want to look at intimacy, scale, and precision, it's going to take a while for us to achieve all three of them. We've got to look at some which can be done at an aggregate level, some which can be done, as I said, through surrogate data, some which can be done through partnerships, and some, to give you a directional view of, how you're tracking, and perhaps run numerous number of scenarios to be able to emulate the one which is closest to what's going to happen by looking at real-time signals. So it will require massive amount of creativity from the data science professional. And as Shantanu said, the more integrated you are to the business, the more you have the pulse of what the consumers are saying, how the business is performing, the better you'll be able to emulate and build your models.
Great, great, very good thoughts, Deep. Shanti, you want to add something to what Deep said?
So as I'm preparing for the world that's coming to us, right? I've actually noted down my first uh, thing that I'll operate by. These are called the 5 principles of the post-COVID-19 world, right? The first principle is contactless. The second principle is social distancing. The third principle is at home mostly. The fourth one is, for most people, it's the essentials first. And the fifth one is shift to digital. So what my data science models are starting to now look like is a combination of a data science and a social science model. I have never built my data science model, and I would be the first to admit that, in a world that will be contactless, where there would be social distancing, people would be wearing masks. How do you put that in the data science model? I mean, what the heck? If I run the same model and say that there'd be so many people visiting my retail store, I'll be wrong, because they would not visit retail stores anymore, right? So the data science, if you look at the profession, there are three components of it. There's data. There are, on the basis of what your hypothesis, there are parameters, and then those parameters have the various weights. To put it in context, if you're going to replace your mobile phone, one of the parameters is the age of your phone, right? And the weight of that is a very high weight. If your phone is more than 2 years old, it's highly likely that you will change the phone, right? We have never had weights for a world that's contactless and social distancing. How do you weigh in those factors? If you're going to go build mathematical models that will predict an outcome, you have to have those, what I call as the social factors, now built into it. And frankly, I'm still sort of working through it, struggling through it. The parameters will change. So, for example, giving the same example, maybe in a post-COVID world, because you'll be using your phone so much, the weight for the age of the phone will go up significantly, right? Or how much usage you have done. don't know yet how it will sort of either whether those will explicitly sort of get into my model, or I have to actually implicitly get into my model, or I have to make explicit sort of weightage for them. That part I don't know. It's a sort of a black hole. What I do know is that the way I'm collecting data today is probably good for next 2 to 3 months. I'll have to watch every week, week by week, how things are shifting. And I have to be able to ready. I have to accept the fact that whatever you do for next is good for next 2 to 3 months. Don't worry about 6 months. You need 3 months worth of data to go to the 6th month, and you would actually need the 6 months of the data to go to the next year, 2 years. And you better figure out how the social factors, as I said, the data science start merging with social, social customs, what I call the social science, in order to give you a much better prediction than you have done before in the post-COVID world.
Yeah. Oh. Great additions, Shantanu. Let me just pull Rajan in this. Rajan, great thoughts from Deep and Shantanu on this. But just elaborating this, could this also mean less and less retail footprint and more digital footprint? And one of the reason I say that is because you may have seen Hyundai. They just started selling cars online. Contactless, but also no store for no dealerships, right? And would it affect the way you think about it? How will it affect the future thinking post COVID, post vaccine? Any reactions to the point that's raised earlier?
I think any commentary on this would be largely in the conjecture, but yes, certainly I think it's a foregone conclusion that there will be a shift uh, of sale from brick and mortar to digital. Will that be incremental, or will that be at the expense of remains to be seen. I think there are certain categories where which will be difficult to move digital, especially if you look at wedding jewelry, which is typically high value jewelry or high value items. I think because it's a very personalized look and feel of a piece of jewelry on somebody is very different from somebody else. So I think there are certain categories where which may grow online, but not significantly enough to see any erosion in the retail footprint. Having said that, the fact remains that I think you all read the press, right? The last 3 4 months has been very very harsh on retailers. So I think that there is automatically, as a result of financial metrics, there's going to be a pruning of digital, sorry, of the physical footprint. My personal assessment is that in the apparel and footwear space, you will see anywhere between 10% to 20% of distribution being shut down simply because it's not viable. Essentially, we've all been set back by 2 years. What we were planning to achieve at the end of this year, we'll only get back again 2 years hence, and therefore everybody's planning, especially because of the cash flow issues of the past few months, will have to be recalibrated. So the physical distribution cutback is going to happen anyway. Will that be compensated and taken up by digital distribution, digital sales? We need to see over a period of time, because it's also led by consumer behavior going to change dramatically. Will they have the same money to spend as they did before? Will they choose to spend even if they have it, or will they save it for a rainy day? Those are still questions that we all need to answer, and I think it'll take at least another 1 year for us to answer, assuming some amount of stability is achieved. We don't see further lockdowns. We don't see further spikes in the deaths and so on and so forth. I still think we are a year away from a steady state situation where we can look back and say, okay, this is a lot of data for us to now analyze because we believe this is a steady state.
Great. Thank you. And let me get Rajiv your perspective also. But before I ask you to comment, let me share a story about the Volvo interception. Rajiv, you might have known about this, but Super Bowl is a big event in US, and 2 years back, and during the Super Bowl event, roughly $60 million are spent on ad and media, just in that during that 3 hours, and most of the spend is made by auto companies. Um, Volvo didn't spend anything during the Super Bowl, but what they did is they launched this called um, "Donate a Volvo to someone you love and respect in your life." and you do it when you see an ad for a car or an auto during the Super Bowl. So you have to send a tweet to this account, say that anytime you see an ad for BMW or let's say Mercedes, instead of watching the ad, what you're doing is you're tweeting why should your father, brother, sister, friend receive a Volvo and why they are great. Why I give this example is an amazing example of data and analytics and media coming together. So that $60 million went waste. Why? Because the moment an ad came on the screen, all the viewers started tweeting and saying that please donate or please give away this Volvo to my sister or brother and father, and here is the reason behind it. There were 60,000 tweets in that 3 hour. You know how many Volvos they gave away? 5. $250,000 worth of, So somebody spent $60 million, probably got nothing. Volvo spent $250,000, 5 Volvos, and they got a 70% uplift after the campaign in the next month onwards. I gave this example to highlight the power of creativity, data, but media coming together and affecting consumer behavior. Rajiv, any comment that the last discussion that can on the consumer behavior data science model that we'll see in this market going forward?
Well, ambush marketing, there is no equivalent to ambush marketing. I mean, but you get 1 in 100 times right? 99 times those $60 million investment would have gone right. This is one time that perhaps Volvo got fortunate, lucky, or it just clicks. Not every time you can have a model based on ambush marketing. I don't know whether you can see me. To give an example, I know someone in Kerala who's printing a mask, and I'm taking a Shantanu's example about earlier about ladies' makeup versus mask. There is someone who's printing a mask for $30 with the face impression, so you can wear your own face and you can do it. I mean, to me, that's ingenious, right? That's great creativity. But somebody, a little printer in Kerala, has thought of it. Can somebody else think of it and do it on a scale level, a little more polished? Perhaps yes, and something like that will happen.
Yeah.
The two big changes that we are seeing, especially in media, and one is a very heated debate right now, which is about the big movies. Will the big movies come in theater or they can come on digital? Now, of course, one of the big movies starring Mr. Bachchan itself is going to come on Amazon Prime this in June. So that's one big debate which has already started about big films. What happens now? Can and should they come on? While we have Nolan in US who's saying my movies will only come in theaters because I want to get people back to theaters. Here we have a different scenario where we're thinking perhaps movies can come on digital versus maybe a cinema. So that's one big debate which has already started. The second is about remote production technologies. We're talking about having perhaps even the IPL without audience, but not just audience, even the technology to shoot and broadcast that maybe with a team sitting in Sweden and London. So you are talking about a complete different scenario where you only have players, just like a video game, playing without an audience, without the broadcast setup, and you and I enjoying at our home. So maybe the 60 million opportunity may actually will disappear if this happens. So it's a new world we're entering. We don't know where the ball will stop, but certainly we know that the ball is moving now.
No, great. Any comments from other participants? I know all of you have given your thoughts, but on this last point, because the sporting events will change, the movie thing will change, the media will change, and it's going to affect a lot of behaviors, both on the supply side and the demand side. Any other comments from your side?
No, it just sounds very dreary if we watch a match without the audience, without the noise, without that energy. Imagine for the players, if we ourselves feel like this when we're watching a TV.
I'm sure we'll throw in the noise for you, Rajan. We will throw in the noise for you.
I think, but the aspect of community will become more and more prominent. So for example, watching a match, while I may not have the experience of going to a theater and watching a match, I could probably use extended reality to be concretely watching a match sitting at my room along with 6 of my friends and doing live exchange of commentary while the match is going on. Now Netflix is already trying to do something where they're saying that, look, you've got to be in sync with what your friends and families are watching, and you don't have to go through that FOMO mindset when your friends are discussing a particular web series and you've not even watched it. So bringing in more immersive experiences, bringing in aspects of community in digital setups will be the new way forward. And do expect a lot more investments happening in animation and using a combination of extended reality and hyper personalization to make it happen. So whether they are fans in a stadium or not, sports is something that is always watched as a group, and I do expect that to continue to happen by using immersive technologies.
Great, great. We are in the
So
last 15 minutes. We are getting, sorry, some questions also. Yeah, go ahead, Annie.
I'm just going to make one comment. I think that those things are coming. I just today someone shared with me an app that creates the sound of office in your house, and I'm putting out the sounds it does: coffee machine, people, printer, open windows, telephone, the office dog, and the keyboards. Right. So the immersive office is actually coming to your house, and rain on office windows. So people are getting there.
New signal, Shantanu. Let me just last 10-15 minutes, and I'll try to include the questions we received on the social media. I think there's a lot of, and I think some of the comments made just now. Real-time data sharing and using that real-time data to make decisions, maybe on, let's say, online channels, on e-tailing. How is the maturity of that? And maybe Deep, you wanted to take that question, and maybe I'll ask Rajan to comment after that from the user side.
Look, I have spent over 2 decades in financial services, and I would say that real-time data is used extensively. When we look at credit card authorizations, this information is used, mined, to make decisions in seconds and milliseconds to authorize a particular transaction. And as with cybersecurity, the use of real-time information will become all the more critical today. In fact, that's one part. The consumers also uh, expect the decisions, the personalizations to happen seamless, regardless of what channel they're witnessing. Whether I'm interacting with a brand via WhatsApp or interacting via a Facebook handle or through their web properties, the expectation is that the consumers are given the same experience. So the real-time information sharing will become more important, which means more investments for the organizations to create their omni-channel presence. And the expectation from the consumer standpoint is that global benchmarks have been set up in terms of speed and intuitiveness. You can't say that you're operating in a sector, hence you can't be fast. People expect you to be as fast and as responsive as Twitter. They expect you to be as intuitive as Google, as seamless as an Apple. So the global benchmarks have been set, and you cannot say that because I'm working in a sector like this, I'm going to take a day to respond to you. You can't operate like a postman anymore, to be honest. And the need for real-time information is more now than ever before. Of course, not every information is required real time, but the ones that create that distinctive experience, and the value proposition for you as a business.
No, very well articulated. And you're right. The financial services is credit card is much further ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Rajan, you want to add anything from your side?
I think it's safe to say that most of retail is not real time, right? In terms of data and data sharing and accessing data and doing stuff with it. But yeah, if you've been a digitally native player and you've set up first digitally and then expanded into retail, we know that you are going to be well on top of real time data, where you have a set of customer service people whose only job is to view customer behavior online and to be able to call up the moment they see something that they find intriguing enough to believe that that will cause them that call to close the sale. So I think retail is still to discover it, but I also believe very clearly that what is happening today is accelerating us all into that. And I do believe it's the time for us to react extremely quickly. It's not about taking your time building the gold standard of omni-channel hardware and software, experience. But I think it's time for us to get out there and get this thing going in the next couple of months, and over a period of time fine tune it and make it the gold standard. Because you're not going to be able to get it right the first time if you've not been digitally native. But it's time for us to react, because real time data reacting to it is increasingly becoming the need of the hour.
Great, great. Let me know, we are in the last few minutes. Let me just ask one question to each of you, and Pankaj, I'll come to you also for a question, and then it'll be good to get your views also. if we are sitting 2 years out, just 2 years, this world changes so fast. Which are the three things in each of your prediction would have happened by that, on the data side as well as on the business side? Like, how would the world be different post COVID? And let's say vaccine may be found or may not be found, but it's not this last pandemic we are going to see, right? So we need to be prepared and thinking about, how our business, our environment will change. So maybe, Rajan, why don't I, start with you, and then Rajiv, and then Deep and Shantanu.
Sorry, I lost you there for a minute.
My question was, if you're sitting in this same forum 2 years out and maybe 3 years out, what would be different, on the data side, on the modeling side, on the business side? What do you foresee?
That's what we're going to hire Bain for.
Yes. Yeah. Apart from that, yeah, absolutely. We'll talk offline, but yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think retail is going to have go through a complete makeover. It's going to be a inside out 360 degrees kind of makeover, because a lot of people are going to fall by the wayside, and a lot of people who are quick to react are just going to prosper. So I think that 2 years or 3 years from now, uh, Indian retail is going to look and feel completely different from, of course, the look feel of the stores, the kind of stores that we have, the kind of digital experiences, how brands are creating omni-channel experiences either on their own or through partnerships. Uh, I also do believe that in the process of transition, I think the next 6 months are going to be quite scary, 6 to 9 months, because there has to be a lot of introspection and a lot of soul searching, a lot of changes in business models, strategy, overall thinking. Do we do things for the long term, or do we do things for the short term? Those kind of decisions are going to be on people's heads. I personally believe this is a long term game. I think we may have to compromise for the next, maybe compromise this year to be able to create a better world for ourselves in the year after, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think retail is one area which is going to be dramatically different.
Very good. Very good. Rajiv, you want to talk about media? Uh, um,
Well, depending, I mean, if you're saying the crisis goes on for 2 years, it's going to be a different scenario altogether. But if you think the crisis will end in 6 months, it's going to be a completely different projection. So it will depend on how long the crisis go. But let's say, assuming the crisis goes for another 18 months, and post that, one, I see a lot of dropouts from the media sector itself. We would have closures of many news channels. We will have closure of many businesses which depends on advertising per se. So one, of course, on that side, we will have a dramatic change. Second, I think internally from a process point of view, how we treat talent, external talent, which is the actors, and of course, in-house talents. I think that's going to be at, we will have a big race for that, and how do we treat them is going to be a big factor. And third is your overall orientation on technology. I think technology is going to be our focus for most of the people in media, because if this goes long, I'm guessing that there'll be some level of re-decentralization. So a lot of decision making may perhaps go from regions and back to headquarters, and that changes a lot of things. And then also the employment of technology, because most of the decision may happen at the central level and they'll be transmitted through technology, and with oversight and supervision, all of that. So it's going to be a different company altogether. If this crisis goes for 18 months, we'll have a different media sector altogether than what we see today, both from an operation point of view and also from a point of view of business models itself.
Great. Deep, you want to give your thoughts?
Thanks, Ravid. I think the first thing, I'll start with the business first. I think the first thing that I would say is that people have realized that it is absolutely important for you to build sustainable businesses. Sustainability will be top of the mind agenda for organizations, and I think the world around us and nature has taught us that it's important for us to start thinking about the environment and the world that we're living in. So I would expect a heightened focus on building sustainable businesses and sustainability. The second, as is already touched upon by my colleagues here, I think business models will emerge with digital first led initiatives, whether it is on traceability, whether it is on experience and what have you. And third, I would expect a renowned focus on health, hygiene, community. So anything around these three, I would say from the business standpoint, would be very important. I think health and hygiene, if you're not in the business of health and hygiene, I think whether it is your employees, whether it is your customers, whether it is your your partners, you've got to have an agenda when it comes to health and hygiene. So those three from a business standpoint. I think from a data, I would not touch upon the demand for AI talent. I think I struggle in terms of getting AI talent. I wonder what will be the demand for AI talent now. But the three things that probably would happen, one is this massive push in using unstructured data, image, video, text, what have you. And there's world of information that is sitting out there which organizations will have to start using. Second that I touched upon was data partnership. I think it behooves organizations to start stitching the right kind of partnership which are non-competitive nature but are mutually beneficial. And third, I think the world will see a new emergence of privacy, trust, cybersecurity. I think those three are big from the data sector. Back to you, Amit.
Very good. Leading signal for Pankaj, AI talent, Pankaj. So for you to note. Shantanu, 1 minute from you, would be very helpful, and then I'll come
Uh,
to Pankaj.
I'll go in 30 seconds. First of all, the behavior will have massive impact on the business. We are underestimating the things that we talked about, contactless, social distancing, all of that on the impact. You actually have to look at every segment if you're starting from your supply chain, procurement, all the way up to your store design, and retool the entire line, right? That has to be sort of the driving mantra going forward. Second, for data, right? When everyone is looking for your data, the demand for the what is known as the privacy preserving AI technologies will skyrocket. People will just get scared of giving so much data that that it will start demanding that look, there has to be some sort of privacy safeguards before people can suck in more data, or businesses can suck in more data and sort of start building models on that. The third, the businesses will have to get real, right? It's been of late with a great deal of, what I'd call as a free cash. Businesses have gotten, in my opinion, lazy, haven't worked as hard to get customers because everyone had cash. Now with cash hoarding and customers unwilling to spend, businesses really have to go with the basics and figure out and work very, very hard to earn their customers' dollars.
Great, great. Pankaj, you want to add a couple of things from your point of view? What do you see as main things different going forward in 2 years, apart from AI talent needs?
Well, I would say the business cannot get to normal till the consumers or the clients will get back to normal. And I think as human beings, we've not found our new normal yet. But I'm very optimistic. If you look at the indications coming from countries like Hong Kong or Australia, people still want to go out. So I think that aspect is not going to go away from us. So for me, the indicators would be whether travel will come back to normal or not, whether sports will come back to normal or not, and that will tell how consumers will behave, whether they would want to come back to buying stuff from the store, have a touch and feel, go eat, consume ice creams on the road. And I think that would be the time when business will start to pick up whether the factors which none of us are controlling as of now, how those factors have influenced the consumer. And then the business may be able to understand to what extent they need to pivot or they need to change. Everything, I think, whatever was discussed on the panel, I have absolutely no reason or contrasting views to challenge or contest anything on that. But I think we still have a couple of more months to see where the new normal and the consumer behavior comes in, and then the business may come back. The second thing I would want to add is that I think now running a business is very similar to driving a car. You need to have a rear view mirror, which is your past data, and see if you can use something to guide you towards your destination. You still have a dashboard which gives you the current data, and you need to know where you're navigating and where you're heading to. So I think this is going to be a combination of a little bit of an art and science, using your intuition, experience, and then still making use of whatever data is available. And as Rajiv said, let's wait for the hope to come back, and maybe things could be back to normal once again.
With that, Pankaj, we have running out of time. So you want to thank, I would like to thank from my side, but Pankaj, you want to do the same thing?
No, a big thank you to you as well, Amit. I mean, you anchored the whole discussion like a experienced conductor in an opera, and I wouldn't have imagined that discussion to touch upon some of the points when we were putting it together. So a big great thank you to all of you, Rajan, Rajiv, Shantanu, Deep, Amit, to you, and my sincere thanks to the entire team of Mint who's made this possible. Just for our audience and viewers, I would like to remind that the recording of this whole discussion would be available on YouTube page for Mint as well as the Facebook page of Mint. And I'm sure some of you are already live on either of these platforms. And you will have comments and discussions on this. You can go and watch it again, perhaps leave your comments. I would want to thank everyone who joined today and sort of gave us an audience. And would like to sign it off now today, promising you to come back soon with another series or another episode of some very interesting discussion, which may sometime take place in June. I hope all of you enjoyed. This was worth your time, and we take away some lessons and great learnings from this discussion. So, a big thank you. Stay safe, stay positive. Let's wait for the hope to come back. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Amit. Thanks, Rajan, Rajiv, Shantanu, Deep. Take care. And everyone watching us, a very good bye to all of you.